Welcome to the Joy in Purpose podcast. My name is Lola Shodunke. I am a doctoral student in a psychology program. Joy in Purpose is a podcast dedicated to conversations about purpose, career development, and mental health. I also interview individuals as they share their purpose stories. I would like to remind our listeners that this podcast is not a replacement for therapy. Information shared on this platform is for educational purposes only. Thank you for listening. I am so excited for you to listen to this interview. This interview touched my heart. Today's interview is with Kareemah Emordi. She is a born-again, Holy Ghost-filled, proud Jesus girl, word addict, and intercessor. She's a former Muslim who converted to Christ later in life after God did a miracle and revealed himself to her. She is the co-executive producer and co-host of the Relevant Show, a revolutionary talk show created to disrupt the mainstream view of the relevancy, reality, and results of the Word of God. This show is co-hosted by a multi-generational team of radical Jesus lovers. Relevant opens your eyes to the ability of God's words to provide answers to the difficult questions facing our world today. Kareemah is recently married to Anthony, the most amazing man she's ever had the honor to know. She's a mother to 2 amazing sons and 14 grandchildren. I believe that you would love Kareemah. Enjoy the episode. Thank you so much, Kareemah, for joining me. I am so excited to have you here to share your conversion story. I like to know, maybe because I'm in the field of psychology, but I like to ask people about where they were born and for them to tell us their favorite childhood memory.
First of all, thank you so much, Lola, for allowing me to be on your podcast. The joy of purpose is so important, our purpose of our life and what we're doing in our life and why we're here is the question that everyone is always asking. And when you figure that out, life is so much better. So thank you for that. I appreciate this podcast. I appreciate the platform that you're allowing people to come and share. I was born and raised on a farm in Michigan. Can you imagine? A farm in Michigan. And I remember one of my favorite, very young childhood memories. And this is kind of funny and mischievous at the same time. I remember we used to have a fruit stand on the road, like a lot of farmers did back in the day. And so I remember as a young girl, seeing all those red apples that my dad had lined up on, they had them put, you presented them well because people wanted to stop at your stand. And I remember, I think I may have been 3 or 4 thinking, well, I want to bite an apple. And I was told I couldn't happen. And so in my childhood mind, I wouldn't took a bite off of each apple because I wouldn't eat the whole one. And then when my dad tried to sell some of the apples, he kept pulling up the apples and they all had bites out of it. And it was so funny. And then the man, the farmer or the person that came up bought the apples and he would say, we'll just cut them off because they thought it was so cute that I had bit, maybe not all the apples, but I had bit a substantial amount of apples thinking, okay, I won't get in trouble because I'm only going to take a bite. I'm not going to take. So that was one of my most favorite childhood memories because we talk about it even to this day, my family.
Oh, that's funny. And it's just some simple things that become our favorite memories. What was your favorite activity as a child? Some people they like reading, painting. I don't know. What was your favorite activity to engage in as a child?
I had so many, but primarily it would have been singing. I'm a worship leader. I sung in the world for many years, jazz bands, blues bands. So I was the kid that was always singing in the house that the brothers and sisters were always telling to shut up. The one that is always singing, no matter what I was doing, I was always singing. I was always listening to music. I was always in anything creative. I'm very creative. So that, either music, writing poetry, writing songs, making up stuff. Making up whole lives. I ended up being a filmmaker later I would just do all kind, anything that imagination was involved, that was me. And oftentimes my mom used to say she's always in the clouds. She's always dreaming because I always had some other scheme or idea that I wanted to to act out or to sing about, all the way when I was growing up.
That's nice. And I can relate to that. So I did want to ask you how, now we're getting to your conversion story. How was it like growing up as an African American Muslim in the United States? Did people think that you were a foreigner? I remember the one of the first person that I met when I moved to the US at age 12. At this time I was 13 going to a different school. She was Muslim and she was African American. And in my mind I thought, oh, maybe she's from Africa, because I never met someone that would, she was wearing the hijab and she was 13 just like I was. And then she was telling me her story that she's African American and we would sit together at lunch. So did you have similar experiences? What was it like being an African American Muslim?
So that's the interesting part, Lola, that is that differentiates me, at least at the beginning years of my Muslim faith, was that we were brought up in the Nation of Islam, which was different. I didn't know at the time than true Islam, and I say that with quotations because true Islam is still a false religion, But see, the Nation of Islam was a sect of African Americans that followed the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and then War of D. Muhammad, and it separated when Brother Minister Louis Farrakhan, which I'm sure you've heard his name, Farrakhan. He was a part of the Nation of Islam. All of us, as a matter of fact, Brother Minister Farrakhan used to give me my awards every year because I was a top student, and so I started off going to Muslim schools. We actually had our own schools, a Muslim school, and that version of Islam, if you will, was we believed in putting the Quran on the top of the highest shelf in the house, literally, and not touching it. I believe God was the person who started the Nation of Islam. Master Farad Muhammad was this light skinned black guy, very light skinned. We had his picture on the wall, and I thought he was God because that's what we were taught. That was God to us. And so what happened was that Brother Honorable Elijah Muhammad was the person that took over. His son Wallace Muhammad went on a pilgrimage to Mecca, which is something that Muslims do. And when he came back, he told his father, "We're not practicing true Islam, if you will." So there was a split, and we call it in the nation the first resurrection, the second resurrection. It's interesting how things parallel to Christianity, but it was just all falsehoods. Long story short was that people stayed with the first resurrection mentality of more like black empowerment. So there's a lot of things I loved about being a Nation of Islam Muslim, because the main thing I got from it is love of self and my color and who I am as an African American. That was very prominent, and the whole industry of business and owning your own things, what I think is important. That was very important. That's why I'm such a business person to this day, because of the foundation I had there. But my family, as my father has always been, which Pastor me, we're people that believe in following the rules of anything we're part of. So when it was said by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad to go with his son, people decided to stay the old way, and they went with Brother Minister Farrakhan. It was a split in the nation. So long story short, it really never was the same, because then the Muslim school closed because, first of all, we got lower attendance. We got enrolled into a public school. It was we lived in a African American Polish neighborhood, but we had to walk literally a mile to school, 15 blocks every day to go to the elementary school. And it was a culture shock for me because, I'm dark skinned. And where my dark skin, I'm dark brown, and, I'm nowhere near light skin. But in the Nation of Islam, the darker you were, the better. So, I'm the
Mm-hmm.
lighter brown. I'm not light brown. I'm like brown. But
Mm-hmm.
my sister and brother were darker than me, and so that was the big thing. The more darker you were, then to go to a school with African Americans and everyone hated their color. It's like the more darker you were, we were called every name in a book, and it was very, very difficult for us because we come from this environment where being black and loving yourself, your queens, your kings, you just learn all this black empowerment to go to a public school with African American children and be degraded every single day because of your skin color. So it was a very interesting dichotomy that I had a brother who was our darkest one. The one brother that looks Sudanese, he's so dark. He got it the worst. I mean, and I don't think he ever really recovered from, to be honest. The
Wow.
vitriol that was hurled on us because of our skin color and not embracing who we are. And I can get emotional about that because I see it even now, colorism and that idea that darker means lesser, or it's not as good. It's just so horrible. And what we learned in the Nation of Islam was to embrace and celebrate and honor our color, which is as a Christian now, I realize even that is not nowhere near the most important thing, because I'm not a colored person. I'm not an African American. I'm a believer first that happens to be African American.
Yeah, you know what you say about the people from the Nation of Islam. I find it to be true because I've listened to some of them on podcasts, and it's about loving yourself, loving your blackness, planting your own food, being able to fight, starting your own business. They talk about groupnomics. And so there's a part of it that can be very, very empowering, especially
Very.
growing up in a place where some people might have experienced being oppressed or being discriminated against. Before we started recording, you talked about how your family, at when you were a certain age, uh, you got to pick your name. Just talk about your family, and if you know the story, how they got involved with the Nation of Islam. I've met Black Muslims in the United States that are like second generation Muslim, third generation Muslim. What is your family story and your story into that religion?
So interestingly enough, at the time in Michigan, Detroit and Chicago, Detroit was one of the in Chicago where actually Detroit, what really started was the area where the nation was first started. And Michigan, when we lived, that was very close, maybe a couple hours away. So you would always see I guess my father was stopped on the street by a Muslim Nation of Islam brother carrying, we would sell the Muhammad Speaks was our newspaper. We had our own newspaper, everything. It was such a empowering movement in some ways. And so he was stopped and told about the nation. And if you knew my father, and a lot of Black men, what really attracted Black men and women to the nation, because it was during a time of life when Black people in America were fighting civil rights. They were oppressed. They were dealing with a lot. So to find a organization, they spoke to the heart of a man and a woman about who they were and made them feel good. So my father went to a meeting at the nation. They had meetings. And from then, because I was really, really young, my family joined the nation. Matter of fact, when they first joined, was I already born? I may have been a baby. And so they joined the nation. They moved to a farm. We had, group. We all lived on different farms. We had our own crops. And so they became involved in it. And then subsequently we moved to South Bend and opened up our own mosque there. Temple number 31 is where the Muslim
Wow.
school was. All of my friends were Muslim. All of them had kids with a lot of families. Another thing they really were very big about getting Muslim families because they were very big on, at least later on you hear the real story because I was a child. So when I looked at it from a child's eyes, and even though my sister's only a year and a half older than me, she told me things that I didn't know. I was like, oh,
Mm.
that was what that was about. So, they were really big on family and they were really trying to target Black men to stay with their families. So they were really big on, finding people who had families. So we came to the nation. We started going. I mean, literally, I was there every single day from being in school or a meeting at the mosque. We ate there, we fellowshiped there, everything, your whole life. Just like now with, in my church, my whole life revolved around the Muslim experience and being a part of the nation. And so, like I said, for many ways, my father had he worked, all days in Notre Dame. At Notre Dame, we ended up South Bend with Notre Dame University. He worked as security all day, security guard all day. He worked for the power plant at night. He had a job. We had a hauling truck on the weekend. He bought us an ice cream stand, and when he got through the hauling with the boys, we took our ice cream stand out and sold stuff. I mean, we were just industrious people. I mean, that was just the way you rode. And so, but what happened when the split came, when the Honorable Elijah Muhammad died and his son came upon, and the nation split, it really affected our family. As a matter of fact, we grew up vegetarian. Well, we ate fish. I think they call that pescatarian, or
Mm-hmm.
we didn't eat shrimp. The only thing we ate was fish. And so I remember when the War of D. Muhammad took over and our family followed that side of the nation. The first time we ever ate meat, quote unquote, my dad bought this big steak home, put it on the grill, and cook it. And for many years I couldn't eat steak because it tasted like an animal to me. It was like so foreign to me. So for many years I like steak now, but for many years, most of my life, I never was a steak eater because I still had that first experience of meat. I'm kind of digressing, but anyway, so that's like kind of our family story into it. We stayed in it. I remember around 10. Okay, so around 9, when the Imam Warfdi Muhammad, and they went from being minister to imam, as they call them in Muslim faith, the true, I always say as true as you can call a false religion, faith. And then he said that we needed to change our name. So my father is very obedient. I learned that from him. We believe in doing, obedience is important in our family culture. So we all changed our names. He allowed us, the kids, to pick our first names and first and middle names. So my name was Cheryl Lou Ann Anderson. I picked Kareemah Aisha. My sister picked Fatima Farida. And then my oldest brother Nasir, my youngest, my brother Bilal picked his name Bilal, and the youngest brother, who was Elijah, he just picked the name, which is the Arabic of Elijah, is Ilias. So his name is Ilias. And then my father picked our family last name, which is Elamine, which is defender of the faith. Because, my dad's one of those staunch brothers, one of those bat carrying, and so that's kind of, and then I just remember we started going to, public schools. It was difficult. And then, but later on, the attendance, a lot of the people that are part of the nation were older, and the younger generation, us, I was literally the only family member that really still practiced, aside from my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, for many years. I mean, I raised my children Muslim with my first husband. Even though he was Christian, I still was like, we can't marry if I can't, teach them. I prayed 5 times a day. I speak Arabic. All my prayers were in Arabic. That was my life. And I just I can't really ever pinpoint when it just kind of wan. I just remember it, even as when I divorced my ex-husband with my children's father, going to the mosque. It was just a bunch of really, really old members, like in the 80s and 90s, me and my sons and my father, and a few ones that I would try to recruit here and there. So it was sad how things went, because there were some things that were great about it. But the one thing I remember distinctly was that I wanted nothing to do with Christianity, because I was afraid, because one thing, if you go to become a Muslim, you can be killed. I mean, it's very, and it was said, if you go back into something that you've done before, is worse than if you've never tried it before. Same thing is in scripture, but it's different ways. So many things I found out in the Quran were taken from the Bible, but I hadn't read a Bible until I got converted. So I don't know how far you want me to go. I'm just kind of just going down this road now.
No, you're good. What I love to do is just allow people to talk, because there's so many gems and it's an opportunity to share your story. So, for someone who just knew that they didn't want anything to do with Christianity, first, you married a Christian man. So, tell us, why did you choose to marry a Christian man? And then tell us your conversion story to Christianity.
So I married Christian. I got married at 19. I was very,
Oh,
very young. I mean, we were both, attractive. He was good looking. He was, well, was in college, it
yeah,
happened.
I feel
And,
you.
and it wasn't like I was like, oh, say not to be a Christian. I just, met the guy, and we got married. We got married very young at 19. I had my first son at 20, second one at 22. We divorced when I was 27.
Mm.
And I went my whole life as a quote unquote Muslim, even though I didn't have a mosque to go to. I would listen to messages. I would follow Brother Minister Farrakhan and Brother Warfdi Muhammad. When he died, I would just listen. I was just kind of a Muslim by having my own Quran, but didn't have a place of worship for many, many years, 20, 30 years, 20 years, didn't have a place of worship. But I still consider myself a Muslim. My brothers and sisters, they don't now, because I've converted all but one. They considered themselves Muslims, though they weren't practicing. I was the only quote unquote practicing. Like, I still didn't eat pork. I never had eaten pork. We grew up never eating pork, so I hadn't eaten pork. I mean, I had, I drink here and there, but my goal in life, I would always tell people, and this is kind of seg my conversion stories, that I always would say, I'm got to go to heaven. So I always gave. I was, Muslims are very big givers. I was always giving. I was always working in my community. I had corporate jobs, and I was always doing things to help my community. And I would always say, like, constantly, I have to go to paradise. I got to go to heaven. It was very important to me. So I tried to live based on what I understood of what's appropriate living as a Muslim, because my goal was to go to heaven. It was never any question that I was going to live wrong, because I had to go to heaven. That was just it. And so I truly believe in it, because I know the power of your word, because life and death is in the power of the tongue, is that God honored my request, because I always said I went to heaven, and God honored my heart. If you remember the story of that man from Caesarea that sent his people to Joppa to talk to Peter. And because God said, I heard the word of your alms and your sacrifices that came up to heaven. And this guy was an unbeliever. He wasn't one of the children of Israel. But because of his good works, God heard him, and he sent men to Joppa to go talk to Peter, because the angel came to him. And then Peter was like, no, I don't want to talk to them. They're not Jews. But God sent them to save them. And I believe and I didn't know this story, of course, prior to becoming Christian. But I read that. I said, oh, that was me, because God saw my heart. He knew the kind of person. So he knew he needed to make sure that the words that I spoke, that I'm going to heaven, even though I didn't know I was speaking to the real heaven, God honored my words. Anyway, that's why I said, people, you don't have any idea how powerful your words are, because I always spoke that. So God knew he had to, and he knew I was so resistant. And I wasn't that kind of outwardly resistant, because I had a lot of Christian friends. All my friends were Christian. I mean, knew very few Muslims anymore. All the ones were old or dead anymore. But I wanted nothing to do with their religion. One of the things is I thought they were all broke and not doing much. I was, very successful, 6-figure, working in corporate America, doing well. And so I'm like, I don't want anything to do with your Jesus, because y'all celebrate Christmas every year after Christmas. All of y'all borrow money from me because you didn't spend money on stuff that you can't afford. Just the whole. And though I didn't, ones that was really close, I would joke with him. But for the most part, I'm like, I'll let you live your life, but I don't see your Christianity working for me, because it ain't working for you. So I don't want no parts of it. And I never said it out loud. That was just my thought in my head, like. And because my only experience, I used to go to, because of the work that I did, and when I was working for Whirlpool and different places I've worked, I was always having to do community work. So I was always out, in front of people. And I would go to churches, and unfortunately a lot of Black churches, sickness, barely making it, and it was just, I've always felt so angry with it. Maybe I don't even think it was a understood anger. It was just like I had this disdain for their faith. Didn't do anything for them. It didn't help them. But I understand why now. But at that time it was like, I'm good on Jesus or whatever that part, because it's not working. And so, okay, where do you want me to go now? I'm just all over trying to let you direct me. Which part you want to hear?
Okay. How did you come to Jesus?
Okay, so that's interesting. So God is he's so faithful, and he's so in tune with who you are and where you need to be to do what he's called you to do. So I went through this period. I was working for I was executive over at Whirlpool Corporation in Benton Harbor, Michigan. And I ran this literacy, ran the educational arm for them. They had the, corporate, and they had a nonprofit arm, and I ran one of their nonprofit arms, which was the education arm, basically trying to get together into, it was a community that they were in, their headquarters was in, where the education rate for most of the people, which were Black, were third grade, well, sixth grade or below. A lot of them were like third grade and below. We had generations and generations of people who haven't graduated high school. So, and they were going to bring all this industry to the community. So they had to bring the educational level up for people to actually be able to do the job. So I kind of got in this place. But in that, I had this condo, and I was living in the heart of Benton Harbor, a woman, her name is Rose Hunt, and she was a Christian, African-American woman. And she was the first person that I had close contact with, because I'm sure it was lots, and I know for sure there's lots of African Americans that are doing well, and Christianity is working for them, but I didn't know them. You know what I mean? That actually practice Christianity for real, not which is one of those, oh, I'm a Christian, but I haven't been in church since Christmas or Easter, the kind of C&E. And she would say, and she ran the community development arm, because she was from that community. They brought her back to come help run some things in the community. And she know how, what I tell people, you should really be very careful how you live your life, because you never know who's watching you. I watched her. She didn't know. I mean, we were friends. She was older than me. I watched her, and she would say things that I always took note of. Because when you do community development work, and plus, especially in an oppressed community, when there's been this years long, conflict with Caucasians and Black people, wealth and the socioeconomic disparities, the educational disparities, there's a lot of conflict. So she did that community development arm. And so she was always getting attacked here from one side or the other, but she had a job to do. It was always something. And she would say things like, oh, I just make the enemy my footstool. Oh, they come together. And she would tell me about these different things people would do. Also, I haven't prayed about it. God at that. And I would literally, I'm getting chills. I would literally watch her get out of situations, or things that people were attacking that I knew that was just wrong. And me, I'm like, all Black power, girl, you better tell them that. Oh, no, that's not how I deal with it. I go to my prayer closet. And though I didn't really cue her to her face, and my mom like, whatever. But I started to call her the Teflon Don. This is mobster in New York. They used to call that because nothing can stick to him. And every time things would just, she was like, oh yeah, this, and I'd be like, how did that work out like that? It made no sense. It made absolutely no sense. So I started to think, wow, what is it about this woman and her faith that's different than anything I ever experienced? So also during that time, I was going through a serious, it was a battle. I realized what it was spiritually, because I started to feel, even though I haven't been going to a mosque, I still consider myself Muslim, but I think being around her and seeing it, it kind of helped precipitate some other things I was doing. I was dealing with a lot of depression, anxiety. People always think making more money make you happy. It's just a lie. If you don't have Christ, you will be like I was, suicidal thoughts, a lot of depression, had an ulcer, was getting panic attacks, going through this really crazy time for like a couple of years. And then I remember calling my father, telling him, Daddy, you know, I need to talk with somebody about my faith. Nothing's working. I'm reading the Quran. Nothing's helping me. I didn't go into the other issues, but he had me talk to different imams. They try to encourage me, but it wasn't doing anything. And I remember I lived in my condo by myself. My children are grown. And I would flip the TV, and if everybody knows me, I don't watch television, but I turned on my TV, and the only thing I would stop on were these Christian television shows on UPN or CB, whatever those different TBN.
Yeah.
And I remember watching those. Only time that anxiety or that oppression would lift is when I was watching. And I didn't realize it at first. I just noticed I always ended up on one, not really listening to them, but just watching them. It was like this peace came on. So I would turn them on and not really listen to them, but I just know that was the only thing that kind of helped me deal with some of them panic attacks. Because literally I was calling, people didn't know, I was calling the ambulance thinking I was dying every other day. That's how bad the panic attacks get. Then I would get up and go to work or leave the hospital, coming to work. No one knew. I never said anything to anyone. So I just was going through that and going through that. But I didn't know that my friend Rose knew, because, the sermon of spirit, now that I know these things,
Yeah.
have been practicing for 10 years. I understand. But she knew she was praying for me. She had a whole church praying for me. I didn't know at the time, because she knew I was right for the picking, but she never spoke to me about it, because she knew I would have rejected it out of just, I'm good. Long story short is that she kept inviting me to the church, but one time I decided to go, because in that point, like I said, I got to the point that my ulcers got so bad I couldn't even drink water. I'm in a lot of pain. Have been, waiting for an appointment. 6 months I waited for an appointment to get to a gastroenterologist to find out what's going on with me. I'm just in a lot of pain, having panic attacks. She had me go to the church, and she's actually left her sister's church, who she was helping lead, to join this church of this young white pastor that came out to me. My job to speak to me one day, and I was like, oh, he don't get to speak to. I haven't talked to one of my staff. I don't got no time for no pastor, especially no white pastor coming to a Black community. He could come help all the Black folks. That was my mind. That was my initial dismissal of him. Like, I don't have nothing to say to him. Of course, I was cordial. Had my secretary. I never even met with him.
Yeah.
So anyway, so I went to the church with her, and I remember the sermon. Wasn't really impressed or not impressed. It was just being polite. But I remember that they had a card that you fill that you put an offering in, and on the back of it, so they didn't take an offering, you just put it in a basket when you walk out. But on the back of it said, "Do you have any prayer requests?" And I put something on there to the effect of, "God, show me yourself," or "God, let me know who you are," something, because I was just feeling lost. Now, I have been to a lot of churches over my career, and I filled out lots of things many, many, many times. That was the very first time I ever heard back from a church. So I told that to my church that I am now. So as a testimony, please follow up, because you don't know who really needs it. Because a lot of people do it as a more of a perfunctory thing, but not really
Yeah.
seriously. But him himself, the pastor, was, of course, he knew I was very well known community leader in his high profile job. He knew who I was, and so he called me himself. And since I didn't know the number, I didn't answer. He left a message on my phone saying, "Hi, this is Pastor Brian. I want to talk to you." And I didn't, and I heard the message, and I told my friend, I said, "The only reason I'm calling him back because I respect you and that's your pastor." Because literally that was the only reason. Hey, Han, I'm good. I don't want to talk to him. So he called me. We talked. No, meet with him out of respect for her. She was my friend. We had become good friends. And because I was her pastor, and I'm always very respectful, so I wasn't going to just dismiss the pastor, especially
Yeah.
if he didn't call me directly. So we met with him, and he gave me this book. We talked, and I told him my faith. I didn't share what was going on, but everybody knew from the spiritual that something was going on with her.
Yeah.
He gave me this book called "The Case for Christ" by Lee Strobel, and
Hmm.
that book, and I recommend, especially back then, so many times, and so many people need to start recommending it again. It was from a Pulitzer Prize winning author who was an atheist who set out to prove that Christ was a lie. And he had been, at that time, 10 years ago, been a pastor over 20 years. But he started out as a Pulitzer Prize winning atheist, set out to go through the whole thing to show that Christ was a lie. By the time God got through with him, he wrote this book, he was converted. So I started
Hmm.
reading that book. Hey, God is so faithful. About halfway through the book, because I had all the things some of the things that's very, very prominent in Islamic religion, that God begats nor is he begotten, basically denying Christ. You can't have a son. That was our biggest contention between Christianity and Islam, is that
Wow.
God cannot have a son, because that's written multiple times, like it's drilled in your head all the way through the Quran. He begats nor is he begotten, basically saying he cannot have a son because he's
Hmm.
God. So the whole premise, the whole foundation of the Christianity is Christ. The whole foundation of Islam is the denial of Christ. He was just a prophet. He was just a man. So anyway,
Wow.
so about halfway through the book, all the things I'd ever said, all the things I learned, I can't even remember them so much. That's how much my mind has been renewed. A lot of times you would spit off all the things we would say, but now I'm so past that point. But halfway through the book, I called my father, because one of the things, you could be disowned. I called my father. I said, Daddy, I think I'm leaning towards this, trying out Christianity. And my father said, and I was scared. It took me a minute to call him, because I'm like, man, I don't want to be. I mean, no one had did it. No one came. Nobody. You don't do that.
Hmm.
You've been a Muslim, even if you're not practicing. You still say you're a Muslim.
Yeah.
He said, daughter, you're gonna always be my daughter.
Oh.
And I knew that was him saying that. I don't care what nobody else say. I'm never gonna. You're never gonna not
Disowning.
disown you. So that freed me. I finished reading the book. I called the pastor. No, I didn't call him. A few days, I don't know, week two. I can't remember the date times. I remember finally getting the okay to go to this gastroenterologist appointment. Now, and this is the time. Now, I'm still having all these stomach issues. Could barely drink water, pain all the time, constant from anxiety and stress. And I know it was demonic oppression now, because didn't want me to cross over, because they knew what God was going to do to me. So it was trying hard to kill me, to have me kill myself, anything he can to destroy me. So I remember going on my way to this doctor's appointment, who I made it 6 months to get into, because that's how he was the most prominent one in the area. So I'm driving, and at the time I'm driving my little Volvo. I had a friend who made me this CD, because I'm a singer. So I mean, I'm a minister now, but music minister, but at the time I'm a singer. And I love good music. So I always listen to popular gospel songs. If it's a good song, I liked it. But she had made me
Yeah.
the CD with all these great, gospel songs. And I just love good music. I always did listen. I listened from everybody. So I'm driving, and one of my windshield wipers were broken. I hadn't got it fixed yet. And I left my water aerobics class, and I'm going to this appointment. Came on, was so excited to finally get some relief. And I'm driving, I'm listening to this song. Now, I'm listening to this song. I read this book, and even though I knew I was going to try it, I hadn't had the courage to actually say, okay, this is 100% confirmed. I said, Daddy, I'm thinking about it. I wasn't convinced all the way yet. Though I knew it in my heart of hearts, it was still all this religion and fear and all this stuff I'm battling, and I'm 40 at that time, 42 years old. So I'm not like a young, I've been in my entire life. The only thing I ever known was Islam. And so I'm driving to the doctor's appointment, and all of a sudden, it started to rain like a monsoon, literally. You know how that, like, buckets and buckets of water, and my windshield wiper on the driver's side was not working, but the other one was. Something,
Hmm.
how you had to get fixed. Oh, I'm gonna get around to. I'm gonna get around to.
Yeah.
Never took it to the shop. So I get like halfway to the place. Now you can't be late. You can't miss this appointment. And I'm like, oh my God. I go pull off and say, oh my God, this rain is so hard. I had to pull over because I couldn't see. I'm almost hit a car. So I pull over to the Walgreens parking lot on my way there. And it's so funny how it works. So I'm sitting there listening to the music, and I just say, God, I said this literally out loud, God, if you're God, stop the rain and get me safe to the doctor's office. Immediately, the rain stopped. And I'm not talking about I mean, like no rain. And my windshield, I had this Volvo, and my windshield had this stuff that beads up, that makes water beads up when it's a little. And then as I thought about the beaded water, it just disappeared off my car. So I'm driving to the doctor's office, like, what just happened? I'm looking around. How do you just say the rain stop? And this wasn't it was a horrendous, the kind of downpour that just don't stop. It has to trickle down, stop.
Mm-hmm.
But the rain just stopped. And I'm like, what? And I'm like, okay. So I'm driving and I'm looking all around. Like, I'm like, oh my God. So I get into the parking lot and I pull in, but of course, doubt. And let me start. I said, well, I thought in my head, well, how do I know it was just me? And then I said, if this is Jesus, I said, no, how I know this is God of Islam? I'm thinking about, oh, this is Jesus, because I knew what I was asking. I needed to be, I said, okay, well, God, if this is Jesus, start the rain back up. A second, another second, a moment, the rain burst out again.
Hmm.
And then in my mind, I thought, well, it didn't start right again. And I heard God audibly speak to me. As clear as I'm speaking to you, I heard in my car, nobody in there with me. You asked me for confirmation and still you doubt me. I heard it
Hmm.
clear this day. I called my friend Rose. Now, I didn't know that the pastor and the whole team had been praying for me. I had been on there, and I know how powerful prayer is. They had been praying for me.
Yeah.
And I told her what happened. She just started shouting glory. And I said, I want to go see the pastor. I didn't know what I was going to do. I just know that very next day I met with the pastor. That was November 15, 2001. I accepted Christ in that back room with the pastor. Um, at that time, I couldn't drink water. I went to the doctor's appointment. I came back. They saw me. I had to go to get gastrologist. I didn't even notice at the time. All I started to be later on, a few weeks later, I noticed that I hadn't been in more pain anymore. I was able to eat. I was like in this whole cocoon that God puts new believers in to really measure.
Hmm.
I went back to get that test. He showed me. Now, this is somebody who had holes in their stomach. I was completely healed. Wasn't nothing. He
Wow.
showed me. He said, I don't even know why you're here because you look like you have a brand new insides. Like
Wow.
everything was perfect.
Wow.
Ever since I've been on fire for Christ. And people
Amen.
sometimes ask me how I can go so far. I said, I feel like I got time. I have to make up time for all those years. And I know that's not how God look at it, but I just feel like there's absolutely my whole entire life is for Christ now. All my money, all my time, everything I do.
Wow.
Sorry.
I so this is audio only, but if you could see my face, I am like obviously speechless. I am moved. From my perspective, growing up in a Christian household, sometimes for me, dealing with my own doubts and my own God, have you forsaken me? This is just like I'm gonna go check out that book, A Case for Christ,
Least
because
struggle.
yes, I'm gonna go check it out because even me that I've been a believer for a long time, I need the encouragement and I'm speechless and I thank God for your life and I thank God that we're doing this testimony. Wow.
Amen.
The last question to round this off. So we were talking about this earlier about your name and why you mentioned something powerful that it's actually a testimony that you didn't change your name. I was telling you that growing up, I know some Nigerians, like my mom's side of the family, they're Muslim. I know some Nigerians that like when they convert, she's a Christian and most of her family are Christian, but when they change to Christianity, they let go of their Arabic name and then they'll pick a name from the Bible. So I've always thought it's Arabic, it's a language. So tell us your perspective for not changing your name.
So, my perspective for not changing my name, because my name represents who God processed me through to become
Mm.
the change agent that I am now in for the kingdom. And my name is an Arabic name, it's not a Muslim name, though I used to call it my Muslim name. It's actually an Arabic name, but I like that it's associated with the Muslim faith because it's a very great conversation started with people. They say, oh, so you have this Arabic name, were you Muslim? I said, by the way, I was. So let me tell you my story. And
Mm.
I've told this story many times in churches, and people are always brought to Christ when I tell this story. because I was not broke, because a lot of people, particularly African Americans, when they go to prison, they become jailhouse Muslims or they become jailhouse Christians, or they're struggling. I wasn't sure. I was doing extremely well financially, professionally. By all intents and purposes, I was the American dream. Yet I was miserable, suicidal, and having anxiety attacks, but only through Christ was I delivered from that. So I didn't go to him as this needy person. And not that there's nothing wrong with it. God take you wherever you're at. But I went against that stereotype that, they found God when they didn't have nothing else. No, I had everything. I didn't need quote unquote need Christ, but I completely needed him.
Yeah. Yeah. That's perfect. Thank you for coming on my podcast. Can you tell us where we can find you on the interweb?
Okay, so me at Kareemah Emordi on Instagram, and also I'm the co-creator and the co-executive producer of a podcast or a talk show actually called The Relevant Show. And it was started for initially to help reach the African American community, because unfortunately, and you always want to reach your people. As a Nigerian, I know you feel that same way. You can't help it. You want to reach your people. And I just feel like a lot of people, particularly African Americans, don't know Christ the right way. They know him more as a religious figure as opposed to a relationship that can actually change your life. And so we started this during the height of the pandemic last year. So it's called The Relevant Show, the word work. And I sent you all of my handles. Please reach out, because it's a space for, and we have these kind of real conversations. It deals with the relevancy, reality, and of Christ, and that you need Jesus now more than ever. And that's what I love about the Joy of Purpose podcast. These kind of stories and what we're doing with the Relevant Show is all about how much can we inundate the airwaves with the gospel of Christ. So if you want to find me, you find me connected to my faith and everything that I'm doing, from my church home to my handles. You'll see all the relevant stuff on there. So right now that's and I work with a multi-generational, other co-hosts. I'm the old guy, if you will. I work with a lot of young people like you. And I do that because my goal is to continually tell people about God. And I like to go out and share my story of my conversion, because there's a lot of people, they're not Muslim, they're not nothing. They got all these new age, they just join whatever to come up, but you need to know that there's only one way to eternal salvation, and that's Jesus, that's Christ. There's only one way, because my life, people call me a Jesus fanatic, or, people knew me before, a cult. And I'm so grateful that they do, because that means I'm doing something right. Because it says in the Bible that God, they will call you a freak, a fanatic. And that's when you know that you're doing something right, because God expects us. That's normal. That's my normal. Jesus, my whole life. That should be the normal way that all of us live. And so that's why I'm always open to be a part of things like what you're doing, Lola, and to see a young person like you doing this, it really warms my heart, because it's like God needs this Elijah generation, which you're a part of, this young generation, to do what you're doing and to be consistent and persistent and steadfast and unmovable in your purpose to share the gospel, because it's so important that people know who Jesus is. Because in this time, in this season, if you don't have a relationship with Christ, you're not going to be able to make it through.
That's a great place to stop right there. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm looking forward to editing this so that I can listen to it again, because I know I'm going to get even some more gems when I listen to it. Amen. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it, Lola.
Thank you for listening. I want you to know that you are valuable. You have purpose within you. Don't forget to rate and review Joy in Purpose podcast on all podcast platforms. Enjoy your day. Peace.